I will call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 16th. With that, I would ask if we could have the roll call, please. Mr. Burns?
Alderperson Diaz.
Here.
Alderperson Doyle.
Here.
Alderperson Linder.
Here.
Alderperson Reekie.
Here.
Alderperson Steiner.
Here.
Alderperson Touche.
Present.
Alderperson Ures.
Here.
And Alderperson McGilvery is not present, may be joining us later possibly.
Thank you. With that, do we have any public comment this evening? Any members of the public that wish to speak? Any members of the public that wish to speak this evening? Seeing none, we will move on then. Next, we have approval of the minutes from the March 16th meeting of the Committee of the Whole. What is your pleasure? We have a motion by Mr. Ures, seconded by Ms. Reekie. Were there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the previous meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor of the approval of minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is 2016 city budget and proposed budget amendments. Mr. Burns and Ms. Engelke have worked on the budget, and Bill, I will turn it over to you for now.
Okay, we did receive, well, actually there are two potential amendments for consideration on the budget. One was submitted by Alderperson Diaz and one is a recommendation from staff. We've also prepared a budget presentation that provides an overview of the items included in the 2016 recommended budget. I thought what we could do is go through the presentation first, see if there are any questions, and then move to discussion of the amendments or other discussion on the budget.
That works. Thanks.
Okay. Andy, if you could bring the presentation up. Okay, to run through the highlights of the 2016 budget as recommended by the Finance Committee. The budget maintains a flat city tax rate, so no change in the city portion of the tax rate, which would remain the same at approximately $6.70 per 1,000 of value. Several of the items accomplished in the budget at that amount. This would fully staff the fire department with a full fire crew of 4 staff, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that would be through a combination of full-time, part-time staff, as well as interns. It adds additional personnel to the library, provides additional support to the Parks Department and the Recreation Department, maintains the funding of the city's replacement funds at the level from the 2015 budget, and also increases the city's levy for capital projects, which would help reduce the need for future borrowing for items such as street maintenance. I have a couple slides here just kind of providing some context on the information facing the budget. The first looks at the change in the city's property tax base, and this graph looks at changes in the percent change in the city's non-TIF district equalized value, so the portion of our tax base that's available to support general operations. The city had growth in 2008, 2009, then experienced a period of much slower growth following the recession, with 2010 actually having a slight decrease in the non-TIF equalized value of about 0.1%, essentially flat. And then 2011, 2012, 2013 hovering around 1%, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but approximately 1%. In 2014, the city experienced very significant growth in its tax base, and a large part of that was due to some of the development taking place on the EPIC campus that is outside of the TIF district, including the value of their Deep Space Auditorium coming on the tax roll. And in 2015, the growth is at a lower level than 2014, but still very significant growth compared to other communities in the state at just over 7% growth in our non-TIF district equalized value. When we take a look at where the city of Verona's tax rate is in comparison with other municipalities in Dane County, we're generally about in the middle. This is information provided through the Department of Revenue from the prior tax year, the 2014 tax year for the 2015 budget year. And it shows that the highest municipal tax rates in Dane County are City of Madison, which is the highest, Stoughton, Sun Prairie, Fitchburg, McFarland, DeForest. Verona is approximately in the middle at an equalized tax rate of $6.65 per thousand. These are all equalized rates based on equalized value, so they're different than the rates printed on the tax bill, but provide a good comparison looking from one community to another. And then you can see the communities listed that are about the same level of Verona or a little bit lower tax rate. So just provide some context of where we stack up with other municipalities. Looking at some of the non-property tax revenues in the 2016 budget, the largest category after property taxes is intergovernmental revenue. Shared revenue aid for Verona continues to remain flat as it has for several years at $132,390. For the expenditure restraint program, the city of Verona had qualified for that in the 2015 budget, meaning that we are eligible for a payment in 2016. And the amount of that payment is increasing by 7.8% to $220,694. And with that program, the total pool of funds at the state level has been held flat for several years, and there's a formula based on which communities qualify and where their tax rates are. So as a result of that formula, Verona's share of that program is increasing for next year. However, we are seeing a decrease in our general transportation highway aids. That's decreasing by 3.7%, which brings us to $677,778. And that again is based on a pool of money available at the state and then an allocation formula that looks at expenditures on roads and how our expenditures in that formula compare to other municipalities that qualify. And then just wanted to note a couple other major revenues included in the general fund. One of our large revenue sources is a payment that comes from the water utility to the general fund for a payment in lieu of taxes or tax equivalent. And that is based on the city and the school district tax rates and the value of assets by the water utility. The formula and process for that is set up by the Public Service Commission, and as the value of assets for our water utility have expanded, we've seen increased revenues in that category, and we're estimating a revenue of $695,000 in 2016. And then we also receive a large portion of revenue from building and planning fees. We're projecting building permit fees at $579,058. That's a slight decrease from where we were in 2015, although this is a difficult one to estimate year to year as the timing is very dependent on when permits are pulled for new construction, especially with all the development that continues to go on at Epic. Then looking specifically at some of the items in the 2016 recommended budget. This slide provides a comparison between the requested budget based on the department requests and the budget as recommended by the Finance Committee. Based on the requested budget, we were looking at a change in the total levy or the total amount collected by 10.5%. As recommended, that's down to 5.6%. If everything requested had been funded, we were projecting a mill rate increase of 4.6%, and as it stands, the recommended budget is just a slight decrease of 0.1%, which would, looking at a $272,000 home, amounts to about $1.25 on that $272,000 home. This next slide goes through the property tax levy by fund within the budget, and this information is included in the budget document. I won't walk through all the numbers on here, but just wanted to highlight that the major areas in dollar terms that are changing from 2015 to the 2016 budget are the general fund at just over $100,000, debt service increasing by about $185,000, capital and replacement fund levy, which is increasing by $138,000, and the fire department increasing by a little over $105,000. And that results in the total before TIF district property tax levy increase of $571,000 or 5.6%. There are several personnel changes included in the recommended budget. One of the largest is for the fire department. And this, as I had mentioned, brings us to full staffing of a crew of 4 for the fire department. And that's accomplished by adding an additional full-time firefighter position. That would bring us to 3 firefighters, and the budget moves both the 2 current firefighters as well as the new position would be scheduled on a 24-hour schedule. Right now our lieutenants are operating on a 24-hour schedule where they work 24 hours on, 48 hours off. Our firefighters currently are working 12-hour days. This would move them to working a 24 on, 48 off schedule as well, so that we have the rotating coverage for providing a lieutenant and a firefighter scheduled each day. The budget also adds 4,620 paid on-premises hours. These are part-time firefighters that work to provide coverage when the full-time firefighters and lieutenants are unavailable, have sick or vacation leave. They also staff additional spaces on the fire crew. And then we currently have an intern program that started with the opening of the new fire station. That program is staffed with 2 interns, and in the 2016 budget, there's the additional funding for 2 additional interns. And the plan is that we would be bringing on 2 new interns each year. It's a 2-year program as they go through their fire science degree. So each year we would have 2 coming on, and then 2 that have some experience that would be remaining on the program. Other public safety personnel changes are for the Fitzroy EMS budget, and while there are not any new positions being created in the 2016, some of the personnel items that are included in the budget is the full year impact of a second deputy chief position that was a decision made in 2015, and there's the full year impact of that in 2016. And then Fitzroy EMS has also proposed that they would take 3 paramedics and promote them to lieutenant positions. The paramedics would continue to operate on the ambulance crew and be part of the scheduled crew in the ambulance, but by promoting these positions to lieutenants, they would be given additional responsibilities for oversight and training of other staff on the crews that they work with. This is a chart that is similar to one we had looked at a year ago as we were looking at the 2015 budget, and just wanted to highlight some of the changes in the fire department staffing. Going back to January of 2015, the fire department was staffed at the station only during the day, and that was through a combination of a full-time lieutenant and firefighter for 2 positions, and 2 positions that were filled with paid on-premises firefighters. And then in the evening, they were relying on paid on-call personnel that are staff that are at home. They get the call, they respond to the station, get on the truck, and then go out to the scene. With the opening of the new station in July of 2015, the city began staffing 2 positions in the evening, a full-time lieutenant and a paid on-premises or part-time driver. And then sometimes we have an intern available depending on the schedule. And originally the plan was to absorb the full year impact of those changes in 2016 and then increase the fire staffing to a full crew in 2017. This budget is able to accomplish that in 2016. So in 2016, we would have a full crew of 4, and that would be through a combination of the full-time positions, the interns, and the paid on-premises staff. And then the paid on-call firefighters would be responding in to provide support for additional apparatus. So the first fire crew of 4 can get out there, and if there's a large fire scene, then additional people are coming to the station to get the second or the third piece of equipment out. Some of the other personnel changes included in the budget for the library, there's an additional part-time reference librarian, an additional part-time library assistant, and then an increase in hours for a library assistant position from 520 hours annually to 832 hours annually. In the Public Works Department, there's a recommendation to have some reclassifications that would not result in any additional total staff, but that would reclassify some existing staff positions to create an assistant public works director, a public works lead worker, and a lead water operator. And part of the thought process here is to provide some additional staff with supervisory and different exposure to other areas of the operations, looking forward for succession planning within the Public Works Department to get more people involved in the operations and management of the department. In the recreation area and also supporting Public Works, there's an administrative assistant, which is currently funded at 60% time. The recommended budget would bring that position to full-time. And then within the Parks Department, there would be an additional seasonal position to help support the parks operations. Just highlighting a couple of the other significant items within the operating budget. The City Council budget includes a $20,000 contribution to the Badger Prairie Needs Network. That's for ongoing operating support, and that's something that would be subject to annual review by the council for the level of funding, but would provide that ongoing support for 2016. There's $5,000 for a contribution to the Verona Road Business Coalition. The administration budget contains $25,000 for contracted economic development services. That amount is down from $35,000 in the 2015 budget. One of the larger line item changes in the Public Works Department is $32,600 for operating supplies and de-icing materials, and a large portion of that additional cost is related to higher salt prices that we're anticipating going into this next winter. And then one of the items that was changed at the request of the Finance Committee was adding $4,000 to the Senior Center for transportation services. The capital budget includes several projects. Again, I'm not going to go through the entire list here as the information is in the budget document, but just wanted to mention that in total, there's $5.5 million approximately in planned general obligation borrowing to support general projects for next year. A couple of the larger projects are the city's portion of the quarry purchase for the quarry along 9 Mound Road, and that would be for providing space for use by the city as a fill site and operations for the Public Works Department, and then continued support for street mill and overlay, other transportation projects, including the County Highway M and County Highway PD reconstruction. And as normally with our borrowing projects, we'd be reviewing our projects and levels prior to issuing the debt in the 2016 year. So we'd have an opportunity to review the list of projects and review the amounts before we would borrow the funds. The budget also includes a significant number of projects in the capital levy and replacement funds, and in total, the recommended levy for capital and replacement funds is just over $600,000. That includes the last 5 items on there, which are the replacement funds for parks and public works and public safety equipment, IT equipment, city hall and public works facilities, and it also includes capital levy for various projects listed below. One that I wanted to highlight in particular is the street mill and overlay project. It's been the city's goal to return to a point where we're funding half of the street mill and overlay through capital levy rather than borrowing. We were able to make a small adjustment in the 2015 budget with about $10,000 that was funded through the capital levy, and as recommended for 2016, that would increase to $126,000, and that's something that as we look at future budgets, it would be our goal to try to continue to increase that amount and reduce the borrowing. Debt service budget in total is just under $3.5 million. That includes $3 million, $19,000 for the general debt service and about $468,000 for the library debt service, and that's a combined increase of $185,000. And offsetting those costs are impact fees that are being applied to reduce the debt service levy for our facility impact fees that we have in place for the police department portion of this facility, the fire facility, as well as the library. And the budget is applying $165,000 for the police impact fees, $220,000 for the fire impact fees. Those are very similar to the levels for those two from the prior years, and then $45,000 for the library.
Bill, before you go on the impact fees, I think it's important to point out that when the city imposes impact fees, it's all on new development. It's not on any existing homes or businesses. So the point that I wanted to make is that if development slows down or if we completely shut the door on development, those impact fees, that revenue goes away.
Yeah, that's correct. The impact fees are collected on new development, and with each of these fees, as the facilities were constructed, there was a study done looking at the portion of the facility that is attributable to growth and new development, and that was used to calculate the fee. As we've tried to apply the fees, we're looking at both the amount of principal that's being paid as well as our impact fee collections. Our hope is to be able to, as much as possible, have level funding of these, but if there is a reduction in the rate of development, there's less funds available to apply.
Thank you.
Then just wanted to provide a few slides looking at some of the multi-year projections that we prepare as part of the budget each year. One of the things that we always take a look at is the city's level of unassigned fund balance, which can also be considered our reserves or our rainy day fund. And the city's been fortunate in prior years that we had built up a strong reserve, and we had adopted a policy that sets a target range of 25 to 35% of the general fund expenditure budget as what we would like to have in that unassigned fund balance. The city was fortunate that it actually had reserves that were higher than that in prior years, and the city's been applying funds from that in budgets to draw that down to within the target range, as well as to help offset property taxes. That had been applied at a rate of $275,000 each year for several years. The 2015 budget reduced that use of fund balance to $200,000. The 2016 budget maintains the use of fund balance at $200,000. And then it is our projection and our hope that in the future, with the closure of TIF District number 7, that we would be able to eliminate that budgeted use of fund balance. And as you can see by the projection here, the city is currently within its target range. All else being equal, as the size of our budget grows, that amount would tend to go down each year, both from the application of funds and just as the budget size increases. We have been fortunate that we have had years where we've had surpluses in either revenues or expenditures below budget. That gives us the ability to potentially maintain that level, but that's something that we would need to watch in the future as well to make sure that we can stay within that range. And then this next slide is just a graph showing the level of the city's capital and replacement fund levy over time. We had reached a low point in 2010 with just a little over $200,000 that was being levied for capital and replacement funds. The city's been able to increase that over time, make some increases, especially in 2014, 2015, 2016. And as I'd mentioned before, it'd be our goal to continue increasing this in the future in order to reduce borrowing for capital items and borrowing for street mill and overlay. And then finally, I just wanted to provide some information on our TIF districts. The city has 3 active TIF districts. TIF number 4, which is our downtown TIF. TIF 6, which includes Liberty and Technology Park. And TIF 7, which is the west side TIF where Epic is located. Projects for 2016 in the downtown include streetscaping and parking improvements at an estimated cost of just under $1.7 million. In TIF 6, we do not have any anticipated city or TIF finance construction projects planned for 2016. There is additional private development taking place in TIF 6. And then with TIF 7, the major project that we've been working on continues to be the reconstruction of Nine Mound Road, Northern Lights. City's been working on right-of-way acquisition and design for that project, and it is our hope to finish the city's obligations for that project in 2016 and be in a position to close the Epic TIF in 2016. We've done some projections on the impact of that TIF closure, and this is something that we've updated some of the slides that we had looked at in prior years. When a TIF district closes, there is a one-time adjustment to the city's property tax levy limit that's allowed under state statute, and that adjustment allows 50% of the value of that TIF district that's closed to provide a one-time adjustment to our levy limit. And this slide goes through the calculation. If we look at the current value of the tax increment in TIF 7, $393 million, compared to the city's total equalized value, just over $2 billion. Right now, the value within the TIF district is about 18.8% of the total. If you take 50% of that, that's 9.4%. And when you apply that to our projected 2016 levy, in rough dollars, that comes out to about $1 million that would be the allowable levy limit adjustment. There's more things that factor into the levy limit adjustment, so this is a little bit of a simplification, but just in round numbers, we're anticipating that we would see about that $1 million increase in what we can levy. Because we are limited to that levy limit adjustment only being 50% of the value of the TIF, the remaining 50% of the TIF district will increase our overall tax base, which would have the effect of lowering the tax rate, all else being equal. And this next slide tries to illustrate that graphically, that if we look at the portion of the city's value that's in the TIF district, under state statute, half of that is available for a levy limit adjustment. The remaining half of that increases our tax base, which would tend to drive down the property tax rate. And then we've looked at projections in the past at that portion for the allowable levy limit adjustment and some of the recommended items that we would address as part of that. We have some costs that are being charged to the TIF district for administration, portion of staff time. The 2016 budget reduces that, but we still have a portion that is being charged there, and those are costs that would need to be worked into our budget. We're estimating that at about $50,000 in rough terms. We had talked about the budgeted use of fund balance. The 2016 budget maintains that at $200,000, and that's something that we would like to be able to phase out when the TIF district closes. That'd be another $200,000. The third item shown on there is potentially levying additional dollars for the street mill and overlay program to try to get to our goal of funding half of that program through cash funding rather than borrowing. That potentially could be another $300,000. Continuing to add to our replacement funds for city facilities, equipment, potentially another $200,000. And then that would leave about $250,000 available for other items or other adjustments in the budget. And one thing I just wanted to mention is that Fitch-Verona EMS has been talking for several years about adding an additional full ambulance crew. Right now they staff 2 ambulance crews around the clock, one of those located in Verona at the fire station and EMS station down the road here, the other in Fitchburg. They're looking at some point, potentially 2017 or 2018, of adding a 3rd crew. City of Verona would have a share of that cost as part of our share of the district. We don't know exactly what those costs are going to be, but that would certainly be a large cost that we're incurring, and that's something that we should be planning for in the future when we take a look at the property tax levy limit. So obviously there's a lot of room for additional discussion and consideration there, but just wanted to provide an update, since this is something we've talked about in prior budgets, of kind of what we're projecting right now based on what's included in the 2016 budget. And with that, I'd be available for any questions on the presentation or other general questions on the budget before we get to the amendments.
I thought what we could do is, before we talk about the amendments, I wanted to check with Cindy if there's anything that she wanted to add, or the members of the Finance Committee if there was anything that they wanted to add before we go on. I'm not seeing any, so we will open it up for questions first. Questions on Bill's presentation? Mr. Diaz?
Thank you. I just had a question about the general debt service number, the $3 million figure. Do we have a breakdown of where that all came from? Because I've gotten a lot of questions about the fire station, as you might expect, and people are wondering how much that's adding to the levy.
Yeah, I don't have a breakdown in front of me. We do have information in the budget document that shows the different issues that are contributing toward that. I don't know, Cindy, if you have anything else to add, or that's something perhaps we could take a look at and provide some additional information on.
There's detail on debt issue breakdown in the budget document, but as far as facilities, that's not in the budget.
Yeah.
I would definitely appreciate it. So
Okay.
Thank you.
I would just say one additional thing on the fire department and Mr. Diaz, and I don't know if there's others that are hearing it out, but there's a lot of rumors out there. And one of the rumors is that the fire and EMS station has cost the city over $15 million. So we are very close to closing out the cost on the fire and EMS station, and it's not going to be anywhere near the $15 million. So, but that is a rumor that is out there that people are talking about. Mr. Touche, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a handful of questions here. On your change in property tax base, which is page 2 in the printout at the bottom, you show a large increase in non-TIF equalized value in 2014 and a smaller portion in 15. How much is that how much of that gut feeling I'm asking for, I guess, is business versus residential value?
Certainly, in 2014, a very large portion of that was development related to Epic. The city has seen continued strong residential growth over both of those 2 years, but I would say that the majority has been business and commercial development, and certainly for 2014, but for 2015, I would say that I believe the business commercial side is larger than the residential. We do have information that breaks it down by class, so we could provide more detail on that if you're interested.
Thank you. On to the next page, page 3 at the bottom. Highway aids, it decreased by 3.7%. And you had mentioned it's a formula based on expenditures on roads compared against other communities. So what does that mean? Does that mean we spent less on roads, therefore we got less money? Or, I mean, it's, you know, I'm just kind of wondering what factor played into the 3.7% drop.
Yeah, our expenditures on roads will vary year to year, and the formula looks at an average of a certain number of years looking back. So as we have higher years either come on or drop off, that'll impact the amount of aid that we receive. We did see an increase from 2014 to 2015, and now we're seeing a decrease from 15 to 16. So it's not that we've got a single trend that we're dropping every year. But I'd say the variation in our expenditures for roads is part of that, and then it depends what's happening with all the other municipalities in the state. If in general expenditures on roads in other communities are going up, even if ours are going up but not as fast as the average in a particular year, we may see a decrease there.
Okay. Lastly, page 5, public safety personnel changes. You talked about the shift in the fire department from going, especially the firefighters going from 12 to 24 hours. And the chief isn't here, unfortunately, but do we have a good sense of the timing of when this will happen? In the sense of, is beginning of 2016, middle of 16, somewhere in there?
I believe it's the chief's intent to do that early in 2016. We probably coinciding with when we're bringing the new firefighter position on. So if it's approved in the budget, that we would do the recruitment process, hire the third firefighter, and then I believe at that same time is when he would make the change that all of the firefighters would go to a 24 or 48 schedule.
So it's tied to hiring.
Yeah, I believe that the chief's intent is to get that additional position on board, because then they can schedule with 3 firefighters in a 24-48 schedule, 1 firefighter scheduled each day out of a 3-day rotation.
Thank you.
Mr. Linder, please.
Follow up for that last one. I believe the chief told me that he was hoping to hire the interns during the June, July break so that it'd be even, because that's when he hired the ones last year. So the interns wouldn't be till June or July, like July 1st or something. Does that sound right, Mayor?
That's correct.
Okay.
Other questions at this point? Mr. McIlroy, please.
Bill, just real quick, thank you. Real quick, the projected increment on page 11 at 393 million. Am I right to assume that in your calculations, that's just the portion of the EPIC that is actually still within the TIF district? It's not the total value of the TIF district. And the reason I'm asking, I'm just looking at the 18% of the total equalized value, and it would seem that there's actually a larger portion of that that's attributed to EPIC. Am I correct? Valuation.
That's correct. The 393 million is just the portion of EPIC's value within the TIF district, so that does not include things like the portion of deep space that's outside the TIF, or the initial values for Campus 4, for example, that's outside the TIF.
And the only reason I was bringing that up is for people who are watching outside who may think that that value seems low for what's out there. I mean, it's important for people to recognize that there's already a pretty significant portion of EPIC that is not in the TIF district anymore, or ever. Thanks.
Other questions, comments at this point? Not seeing any. Bill, do you want to address the amendments then, please?
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, there are 2 potential amendments that were sent out and hard copies passed around. The first was from Alder Diaz, and the explanation on it is that instead of changing the levy rate or the mill rate by a 0.1% decrease, to use that funds to offset the borrowing for the mill and overlay for existing streets to result in a net levy rate or mill rate of 0%. And based on the final assessed value numbers that we have, we're anticipating that would be $6,650 that could be increased in the levy, that would bring us from the 0.1% decrease to exactly a 0% change in the property tax rate for the city. The second amendment, which is related to that, and this is a suggestion from staff, it actually does 2 things. One is it makes a correction for an item in the recommended budget related to the police operating capital. Included in the police requested operating capital were funds for a new portable alarm for the city, and the recommendation was to fund that in 2015 out of unexpended funds in 2015 rather than 2016. However, in putting that recommendation together, I had pulled a wrong number from the budget, and there actually ended up being $700 left in the 2016 budget for that item. So there are funds available in 2015. The intent is to purchase that in 2015, and that would give us the opportunity to reduce that police operating capital by the $700. It's really a cleanup or a correction. And then the recommendation from staff was to take that $700 plus the $6,650 that would bring us to exactly 0% on the mill rate, and add that into a personnel contingency in the general fund. And the rationale for that is that there are some items that are pending a review under the city's compensation plan. Those include the Public Works restructuring for the Assistant Public Works Director, the Public Works Lead Worker, and Lead Water Operator. And we've, in the Public Works budget, had identified where we anticipate those positions would fall within the compensation plan, but we have not received the results back from Springstead on reviewing the placement. There's also a request that came in after the initial budget amounts were set to review the placement of the parks maintenance worker positions relative to the Public Works positions. And some additional information was provided to Springstead to look at the grade placement of those positions. And again, we're waiting to hear back the results of that. And then the final item is that we are in the process of doing the recruitment for the city clerk position. We have a budget for that amount based on where the previous incumbent was at, and if there are funds available in personnel contingency that would provide additional funds if needed, which we don't know at this point if that would be needed to be addressed or not. But our thought is that for those various reasons, it would be nice to have some flexibility to have those funds in the contingency.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Questions or comments on the amendments? Mr. Diaz?
I just had a general question and then a comment about the staff recommendation. If, for example, the amendment wasn't made and it did turn out that the city needed to spend $7,350, where would that money come from?
We would likely try to look elsewhere in the budget and see if there's funds that could be applied for that purpose.
Okay, and then now to my comment. I guess the reason I made my amendment is because, as I've said over the past few years, I think the city borrows a lot of money. I wish we borrowed less money. Every dollar less money that, every amount less, the less money we borrow, the less money we have to pay back in principal and interest. And I think it's the kind of small incremental victories, I guess you would say, over time that can add up to big advantages. You know, it's not, I guess I just don't think the average homeowner is going to notice $1.25 back on their home. And I think if we borrow less money, we have more flexibility to keep the levy rate increases low or at zero in the future. You know, I'm just looking at all this stuff and all the money we've borrowed, and it seems like we've been borrowing a lot of money. And I think, you know, getting to 24-hour fire coverage does make it worth it, but I feel like there's a lot of caution about how much money we're borrowing. And like, you know, I know this isn't a huge amount, but like I said, small incremental advantages. Of course, all that being said, I think the staff amendment also looks pretty good. And I wouldn't want to have us in a position where we say we're going to spend an unrealistically small amount and then need to scramble around with the budget. I think we should be cautious, and I think a 0% increase is actually pretty good. So.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Any other questions or comments? And we are in the committee of the whole stage this evening, so we will not be taking actual votes. We can do things by consensus as a recommendation for next week, Monday, but there will be no actual votes tonight on the amendments. Questions or comments? I know for those that might be watching at home think that, you know, here we're talking about an annual budget. We're talking about a levy of several $1 million. This is something that the staff and finance committee have been working on for a long time. So I think we have a very good proposed budget. I think we've got, you know, a few amendments. We can take a look at them. My recommendation would be that and no, not trying to discredit Mr. Diaz in any way. I think we have a very reasonable amendment that came from the city staff. The direction that the finance committee gave to city staff and to the mayor 2 finance committee meetings ago was to bring a 2.95% increase down to 0%. And the increase, actually it came down slightly below that. So I think that the staff recommendation is a very responsible amendment and still keeps us at a 0%. So that's what I would urge you to consider. But we would appreciate other questions or comments. Mr. Touche?
If we don't use the money for, just thinking about merging the 2 amendments, if we don't use the money this year for the general fund relative to personnel, can we apply it towards, at the end of the year, our levy? Just trying to stay flexible.
We can, you know, if the money is budgeted and not spent, it would, unless encumbered, would roll into the reserve fund for the following year. So the money is still there. It's not that it would be wasted, and it would have an impact, yet a minor impact on the budget for next year. But I think the cleanest way is to accept one of the two amendments, and go from there. So it might, and I don't know if Bill and Cindy agree, but I think that's the cleanest way of doing things. Other questions or comments? Ms. Reiki?
So my understanding is we would not want to vote yes on both of these.
Well, certainly it's an option. If you vote yes on both of them, you would see an increase in the levy from the prior year.
And do we know what that increase would be? The point one,
It'd be about
right?
0.1%.
About 0.1. Mr. Linder, please.
Yeah, I think both the amendments are reasonable to get to zero. I would lean towards the staffing one, just to give them flexibility. I know that there's some unknown factors there. But as a general thought on the budget, I don't know, in some ways I feel like we glossed over a little bit, but it's been a long process to get to the full-time fire 24-hour staffing. It's been years and years and years, you know, building the building and consolidate, or with the town, the new agreement with the town, with the fire department. I said it's a really big deal. It's been a long time, a long planning process, and I think that's a really big achievement to get that done this year. It's one thing that I haven't been involved with the whole trip, but I was on the fire commission years ago, and before any of this really started, and I know where we were at and where we're at now, and it's a big journey. I think that's pretty exciting. I think it's going to be great for the citizens of Verona. And the
Thank
town.
you. Other questions or comments? Other questions or comments? Mr. McGilvray, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree. I certainly appreciate the sentiment behind Mr. Diaz's amendment. In all honesty, I would say that I agree. Sometimes it's those small victories that do make a big difference. People notice that. I would tend to agree with Mr. Linder that the staff proposal, I think I would lean towards that one rather than Mr. Diaz, not because I don't see the value, just I think that's important maybe that we have this other information in front of us, that we keep that flexibility available. The other thing I would just like to say, having been part of the process and involved in the borrowing of money over the last 11, almost 12 years now, I would say that the city made a conscious decision 13, 14 years ago when it started, when it decided to grow and try to attract businesses like Epic, that was what we wanted to do. And sometimes in order to do those things and in order to grow and still provide services, you have to make investments. You have to borrow money in order to make investments in infrastructure. And I think looking at the cities, where the city sits right now, you'd be hard pressed to argue. There'd be very few communities, I think, that would argue that we are sitting in a very good place because of the investments we've made in our community. And I certainly recognize people's comments and their hesitance to borrow money, but really it's been for the city's betterment in the long run. And I think those have been good investments, and long term, I think the people in the city of Verona will certainly appreciate an increase in the quality of and value of their life. So that would be all I would like to say, other than thank you again to staff for working to make those adjustments and amendments that we requested in order to get us down to that 0%. I think people don't often realize how much effort goes into creating this budget, and I'm not talking about personal effort. I won't speak for the committee. We show up, but there is so much work that is done behind the scenes that we may spend 3, 12, 15 hours developing a budget or working with staff to develop a budget, but I have no concept of really how much time even goes into it beyond that. I'm sure it's a significant amount. So thank you very much to staff.
Thank you, Mr. McGilvery, and I know you've been involved with budgets here for a long time, and this isn't just a one-year process. We approve annual budgets, but we really take a look into the future. And I would agree with you also that as far as the debt goes, I really see that as an investment into the city. And we started doing that a number of years ago, and I think really that's how we have to explain it to people, that we are investing into the community. That's what makes Verona a special place. That's what makes people want to move here, along with the great school district that we have, the recreation programs, all the good things that we hear about all the time. That doesn't just happen. It's because of the staff that we have and other people that have served, those of us that are on the council right now and those that have served before. It's been many years in the making, and I see a very, very bright future for the city of Verona. I do have to admit, though, that I was a little concerned tonight when Mr. McGilvery arrived, and I saw that he had a crescent wrench with him, because in all my years of working on budgets, I've never seen anyone bring a crescent wrench to the meeting, so I wasn't exactly sure what he was going to try to attempt to do with the budget.
My hammer wasn't available.
Okay. Other questions or comments? If not, Mr. Yurs, please.
Guys, I want to say, I do think we have a very good budget. I like that we're maintaining city services, we're adding staff where we need to add staff. We're looking at making sure that wages are where they need to be, especially for areas that might be lacking, and making sure we take a look at that. And I really have a lot of respect for Mr. Diaz's amendment. I think had we not had the staff one, I would totally support it, especially since rather than having a ceremonial decrease in the budget, not borrowing so much. I do think we've made some great investments in the city, and I stand by those as well. But at this point, I would support the staff amendment, but I do think on the whole we have a very good budget.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If not, I would ask, are we prepared to adjourn until next week, Monday? We have a motion by Mr. Touche. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Ricky. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. We are adjourned. And thanks again to the staff and everyone else. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you.